Welcome to Beyond the Paper Gown, a podcast that dives deep into the health issues that matter most to women. I'm your host, Dr. Mitzi Krockover, and in this episode, we're pulling back the covers on a topic that affects us all but is often overlooked: sleep health. And there will be more puns. Joining us today are two distinguished experts who are here to wake us up, I told you, to the importance of a good night's rest. First, we have Dr. Barbara Roden, a healthcare industry veteran with over 15 years of experience. Dr. Roden brings her unique perspective on the cultural and societal barriers that prevent people, especially women, from getting the rest they need. Also with us is Dr. Funke Afolabi-Brown, a board-certified sleep medicine physician with a background in pediatrics and pediatric pulmonology. Dr. Afolabi-Brown is on a mission to help individuals, particularly women and children, change their relationship with sleep to reach their fullest potential. And all kidding aside, sleep is critical to our well-being, including our physical health as well as our mental and cognitive health. Yet, in spite of the growing awareness of the need for sleep, our culture doesn't always make it easy for us to adhere to those healthy habits. And for some of us, there are significant barriers and inequities when it comes to getting restful sleep. Today, we're going to pay special attention to these issues, as well as bust some stereotypes about sleep conditions, especially when it comes to women. And if you're caring for kids, we also have some surprising insights about the importance of sleep in development and ways to address sleep issues in children. Whether you're a busy professional, a parent, or simply someone who wants to understand the power of sleep better, I know you'll find something useful in this episode. So let's dive into the world of sleep health. And just a reminder that this podcast is for your information only and should not be taken as medical advice. It is my pleasure to have two esteemed guests today who are going to be talking about a subject that is near and dear to everyone's heart, or if it isn't, it should be. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. Dr. Barbara Roden, would you start us off?
Thanks, Dr. Krockover. I'm Barbara Roden. I've had over 15 years of experience in the healthcare industry with a diverse background that spans from my early days as a bench chemist with DuPont to leading growth initiatives at major enterprises like the Healthcare and Siemens Healthineers. So my journey has taken me through various facets of healthcare, including my most recent role as Chief Marketing Officer at Primasun, where our mission was to pioneer digital pathways to make sleep the medicine everyone can access. And this was a joint venture between Verily and ResMed. And in that role, I developed a deep commitment to promoting sleep health, addressing the cultural and societal barriers that prevent people, especially women, from getting the rest they need. I'm excited to join today and looking forward to the conversation.
Terrific. Thank you. And we're going to get into many of those topics in just a little bit. Dr. Funke Afolabi-Brown, I hope I pronounced that at least mostly correctly.
Yes.
Please tell us about you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm Dr. Funke Afolabi-Brown. I am a board-certified sleep medicine physician. I have a background in pediatrics and pediatric pulmonology, and I obtained my sleep medicine fellowship at the University of Pennsylvania. And I have a speaking, coaching, and clinical practice. I'm a woman with multiple hats, but I always say sleep is my superpower. And so really my mission is to help individuals, especially women and children, change their relationship with sleep so that they can thrive to reach their fullest potential. And I'm excited to be here.
Funke, you were just saying something about wearing many hats, but that sleep is your superpower. And to me, that seems antithetical. How do you have so many hats and have time to sleep?
You know, one of the things I talk about a lot is about setting boundaries and realizing that we actually don't have 24 hours to do the things we have to do. We have probably about 16 as adults because we're meant to be sleeping for those 8. So when I have that mindset shift of whatever I'm doing right now, it has to end in 16 hours. It helps me really with focus and prioritization. And I'm someone who's, I don't know, from when I was young, I've always been really sensitive to sleep deprivation. And so I can see directly the link and the correlation personally, of course, and we know with research between, poor sleep and impaired performance. And so when I start to see that I'm slowing down, I'm becoming exhausted, I'm less productive. One of the first things I check in is, what's been going on with my sleep? So, and I think that's just an awareness that many of us have to have, that it's not sometimes working harder. It's about getting the rest we need to help us to move forward with whatever it is that we're tasked with.
It's funny that you'd say that, Funke, because I've been in, throughout my career, and particularly in corporate settings where sleep deprivation was often seen as a badge of honor. This is a pervasive mindset that I think culturally we've really implemented, right? It's just we feel guilty about needing sleep, typically as women with the many hats we wear, and then there's just this societal expectation that we undervalue rest and we grind and the 5 a.m. club and all of that. And, I think we've glamorized sleeplessness to the point where, we've shifted our focus really. And I think it's important for us, particularly as women, to really look at that concept of feeling guilty about this. As a mom, my son had a reverse sleep cycle, and I struggled with working and taking care of him and also managing the household, right? And as you're right, decades of research confirm that poor sleep doesn't just lead to us not functioning well throughout the day, but lead to significant health issues. And so we need to shift our cultural mindset to really recognize the importance of sleep for overall health.
Absolutely. And Barbara, you wrote 2 great articles, one in Fortune and one in Fast Company, that talks about women and sleep and that guilt that I think, feel, that is also exacerbated by this kind of male model that says you have to get there early. So if you're a professional woman and a mother and, everything else, you're getting all those messages. And then the second article that you wrote talked about the difference between Gen Z and the rest of us. I think certainly since the pandemic, not only that generation, but maybe all of us have started to really protect our time a little bit better and our lifestyle. But I loved what you quoted Bon Jovi as saying, I can sleep when I'm dead. And I used to say that all the time. Is that a terrible thing? Especially when my kid wasn't sleeping,
Absolutely, absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, the music reflects what we think about as a culture, right? And it's really, you're right. Post COVID, we're beginning to see more awareness around the need to prioritize sleep. But I'd say my generation, we still are kind of committed to, look, you have to do what you have to do. You burn the candle at both ends. And what we're finding is that Gen Z is saying, look, we're going to make choices here, right? That we want to be productive. We're going to maintain our social connections, and we're also going to prioritize sleep. And I think, when you look at the pervasiveness of wearables, we have watches now that are helping us measure our steps, and also looking at how much time we're spending sleeping and helping us to understand more about sleep health. We have things like, the Aura ring that many of us wear, right? And so we're all monitoring this more. So you're right. I think there's hope and there's a light at the end of this tunnel where we're beginning to see signals that there's a shift culturally where we're beginning to value sleep as an essential part of our health and recognize how crucial it is from a public health perspective.
I absolutely agree, but I can't stop thinking about, and Funke, you'll, I know, resonate with this, and Barbara, I know probably when you were doing your PhD, same kind of thing, is that our academic institutions and our training was, again, very different in terms of the values. I mean, again, I remember 36 hours without any sleep on call. And we know that that is not good. And I know that there's been some changes, but they're not as much as they need to be. You've got doctors who are not walking the walk, and their supervisors are certainly not. And then we have schools that start at 7 o'clock in the morning because they've got to cram everything in terms of the extracurriculars and in so many areas. What are we seeing as a society in general and as individuals because of those societal pressures to not get the sleep that we need?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think there's a shift and there's an awareness. And when I look at this shift, I typically look at it from multiple levels, right? So there are individual levels, right? There are interpersonal levels, and then there's structural and systemic levels. And I think while as individuals, like you said, now the narrative is changing. We're getting people being more aware, actually almost hyper aware of their sleep statistics. And it's now causing another sleep issue, which we call
Right.
orthosomnia, where people are now
Anxiety.
obsessed. I'm telling you, because the amount of data people are coming to me and saying, well, look, my ring said I didn't get enough deep sleep. Let's fix that, right? So it's becoming the opposite of what we really want. But when we think about just even that structural and systemic level, like you're saying, like organizations say, yes, we need to prioritize wellness and well-being. But when it comes to, I will say when the rubber meets the road, literally, how are we implementing this? And we're not seeing this in schools, right? We're not seeing it in the healthcare system. So we still have a long way to go because we're seeing it across the board, right? When we're talking about physical health, right? We're talking about cardiovascular health, increased risk of stroke, hypertension. There's so many, arrhythmias and, so many things, immune functions, our metabolism with increased risk of diabetes and obesity. When we think about even hormonal balances, right? And so many levels. And then when it comes to actually what is driving this, which is we want to work harder so we get more results, in terms of our emotional and mental health, we're seeing increased cognitive decline, decreased productivity, poor decision making, poor executive function, leaders that are not necessarily working at the capacity they should be. And it's impacting the bottom line. It's impacting the quality of work of their employees and their teams, right? We're seeing mental health crises all over in every sphere. And, and so the list goes on. So these things have not changed. There's an increased awareness. But I think that we just really need to continue to put that pressure, and not even talking about healthcare disparities and sleep health disparities. That's also a big issue where we now know that also can impact, our sleep overall. So yeah, there's still so much work to do.
Sure. And you did bring up the sleep disparity issue. And again, Barbara, I'm so glad that you wanted to talk about this as well, because I don't think we appreciate that or why that is. So do tell us a little bit
Yeah, I
about
mean, I
that.
was fascinated by this. That was actually the variable that that I used when I was making decisions around whether or not I would take the role as chief marketing officer with Prima Sons. I started doing research and I recognized there is a whole area, a whole field focused on equity. Sleep equity is an issue.
Hmm.
And as I dug more into this, we did a number of experiments actually in different markets. And what we found is in certain urban centers, where we started to talk about, oh, we need to focus on prioritizing sleep. Through data, people were saying, that's fine, but I have to sleep with my TV on and with the volume at the highest level possible because that will deter potential invasion into my house, right? There are robbers who would then say, oh, somebody's home. And so it reduces the risk of me getting robbed at home, right? When you think of the concept of weathering and structural racism and showing up as the only in settings repeatedly, the impact that that has psychologically, what data is showing us is regardless of socioeconomic status for Black individuals across this country, you could be at the head running a company or you could be working, you could be a shift worker. At the end of the day, the struggle from a sleep perspective is similar. Um, because of the weathering on your body and because of the structural racism that you're experiencing through the day, we now have data that shows that even some of the examples I shared around, look, I have to have my TV up, or I may need to go work, at midnight, or I can't afford a very expensive bed, or have access to some of these wearables. Even when, as Black Americans, people can afford these things, we're still seeing significant trends with poor sleep health, poor sleep quality, just based on the societal pressures that people experience during the day. This is an area that I often, when I introduce the topic, people go, "Oh, that's an aha! It makes sense. We never thought of that, right?" And how do we then go in and address some of these disparities, which then eventually, obviously, are linked to social determinants of health, right? So how do we ensure that when there's food insecurity, how do I go talk to somebody about sleeping well when they can't think about what they're going to have for dinner, right? And so we need to recognize that there's an ecosystem here at play. And from my perspective, I really believe that sleep is not a pillar, it's actually foundational to health. And if we can't find a way to ensure that everybody accesses sleep as medicine, then what Funke was talking about in terms of increased risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, depression, the linkages are strong, right? The data is there. And so I think when we find ways to address something as basic as sleep, we will really, as a culture, as a society, be more productive and ensure that people can show up as their best self.
Explain to the audience who might not know the specific term what weathering is.
So when there's repeated exposure to socioeconomic adversity, to political marginalization, to racism, to perpetual discrimination, um, that's harmful, and that phenomenon is what's called weathering, and it's basically chipping away at one's health. When you're at the receiving end of discriminatory attitudes, it causes aging, premature aging, or even premature death, right? And so that's the concept of weathering.
In our discussion of sleep issues affecting women, we took a fascinating detour into the world of pediatric sleep. As many of you well know, a child's sleep patterns can have a profound impact on a mother's rest and overall well-being. When kids don't sleep well, it's not just their health that suffers.
When kids don't sleep well, one of the first things we start to see is an impairment in their growth and their learning. We start to see things like behavioral focus problems. And actually now, a lot of times when kids are diagnosed with ADHD, many times the symptoms they have are they pretty much mirror the symptoms a child who has not had enough sleep would have.
Now, here's something every parent should know. The National Sleep Foundation has found that almost 60% of middle schoolers are not getting enough sleep. Almost 75% of our high schoolers are not getting enough sleep. And even the younger children are also sleep deprived. According to Dr. Afolabi-Brown, a newborn needs about 14 to 17 hours a night. A school-age child would need anywhere from about 9 to 11 hours. And then your teenager needs about 8 to 10 hours. One sleep disorder that's often overlooked in children is sleep apnea.
Sleep apnea, it is grossly underrecognized. Right now, the prevalence is it's anywhere from about 2 to 6%, depending on the literature you're looking at. But I would dare say it's a lot more. Again, because of access, because parents think snoring is cute, or they were told by their pediatrician they're going to outgrow it. If you have a child that's snoring, that has restless sleep, they are getting pauses in breathing. They're not getting oxygen supplied to their brain intermittently. and it's going to fragment their sleep and it's going to cause daytime behaviors. So I would say that's one thing I would want people to be on the lookout for. If you have a child that's snoring, not just snoring with colds or, snoring occasionally, but they have what we call habitual snoring, you do want to say, okay, I think I need to talk to my pediatrician, and just be persistent. Tell them you listen to this podcast and you were told that snoring in kids habitually is not normal. So when they tell you they'll outgrow it, you could say, I beg to differ, right?
We also touch on a topic I'm sure many of you grapple with, screen time. And screens affect sleep in 3 ways, as Dr. Afolabi-Brown explains.
We do know that screens emit blue wavelength light, which suppress our brain's production of melatonin. Melatonin is the sort of darkness hormone that emerges and helps us to feel sleepy. So there are some studies that show that there might be a suppression of that, and that might make it harder to fall asleep. And we tend to see it, I would say there's some studies that show that, especially for younger kids, because they have a more clear cornea, so they absorb that light even more than adults. So the impact can potentially be more.
There's so much more to unpack from our conversation about pediatric sleep and how it intersects with women's sleep health. Dr. Afolabi-Brown shared insights on other sleep disorders like restless leg syndrome, the importance of consistent sleep schedules, and strategies for establishing good sleep habits. We've placed that full conversation on YouTube and put the link in our podcast notes so that you can access this valuable information that can help both you and your children get a better night's rest. So let's shift a little bit, and it's so typical. We talk about the kids before we talk about ourselves, but I want to talk a little bit about sleep in women. We started out talking about that, and Barbara, talk a little bit about your journey to the extent that you'd like to, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the changes that happen as we go through life.
Yeah, as we go through different life stages, right, as women, obviously I leave it to Funke to talk about the impact of hormonal changes. But what we do see is that about 20% or so of women develop obstructive sleep apnea during menopause due to hormonal changes. And during perimenopause, which we're now all getting much more educated on, which is a great thing, we learned that the prevalence of sleep apnea increases significantly as well. I was fine, for the last 5 years or so. I know that family members on vacation would complain about my snoring. And
I'm laughing because we have a very similar story, right?
yeah, we bonded over this. My sister refuses. We were on vacation on the other side of the world in Thailand, and she was just like, I'm exhausted, I'm jet lagged, and you're not helping, right? And I said, then forget it. I'll get the bigger room, the king size bed, and you guys go. But I recognized, obviously, after delving in the state, and to be fair, I walked around like that and thought, no big deal, right? But then really understanding the link to cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and some of the other, from a mental health perspective, the direct link to depression, I thought, okay, probably time for me to go and seek out and have an evaluation. And I actually went. I didn't do it in the most what most people are doing now, leveraging home sleep tests. I actually went to a sleep lab, which was a heck of an experience. I spent the night in a converted warehouse, in a sleep lab, and it was interesting to have 50 wires hanging off and the people telling me to sleep when I'm obviously having trouble sleeping already. But it was also interesting from my perspective, because I didn't realize, I wasn't educated on the fact that there would be gel put in my hair.
Oh, interesting.
And as a Black woman, having gel in my hair and just assuming I'd go home and shower isn't quite um, that's not quite, that's not a tactical option. Yes. Particularly depending on the style that I'm wearing at the time. So the first time I went to the sleep lab, I had to postpone my appointment. Because they explained they would be putting gel. I had meetings in the morning, and I didn't have an appointment with my hairstylist. And so, there are things, those are some of the nuances that we need to ensure that we shine a light on, from an equity perspective, to ensure that even when we do have access, we also need to ensure that the providers are educated on some of the nuances that, women might show up, and
Sure.
they may need additional support. So when you think of the fact that, there's, for every American, for 43,000 Americans, there's one sleep condition. And then when you think of overcoming that hurdle to actually get into a sleep lab, there's an opportunity to really enhance the patient experience, so that this becomes, something where I could then, everybody who has the experience needs to be an advocate. And we try to educate everybody around the need for the testing. I know, Smithy, in our interaction, you and I are aligned on the fact that this should be a standard part of your annual exam, right? And I can tell you, I've raised before, look, I'm not sure I'm sleeping well, and I've gotten a nod. And I understand the poor plight of the PCP, right? Your primary care provider. Think of the really convoluted pathways to get access to care. And so, unless you're really coming in with significant challenges, they tend to just say, look, manage it from a hygiene perspective, but we don't necessarily need to diagnose and have a disorder identified.
Doctors really, in medical school get very limited training in this area. And myself included, my stereotype of someone who has sleep apnea is, kind of a beefy truck driver, right? Who's got a thick neck and who's obese and, is snoring and all of that, not a, thin old lady, So, and I think that my doctor felt the same way, right? Because,
Yes.
and I'm not going to go into mine. You can read about my story. I actually wrote a blog about it. I do agree. We need to, not to get on my bully pulpit, but we need to screen. When you say 25% of women in menopause, go through this, that's not a small number. And we're still not talking about it. So, Funke, talk a little bit about what sleep apnea is briefly, and what are some of the changes that happen that make women more susceptible? And are there any other issues that women have to go through? And I know I just gave you 3 questions to answer all at once, so I will go back to them if you need reminding.
So sleep apnea is, pure definition. It's pauses in breathing during sleep. And it's really what's going on is there's collapse of the upper airway, which makes it hard for you to breathe. And so 2 things can happen. Because you are making an effort to breathe, but there's an obstruction, you may start to work harder to breathe, to take that breath in against that obstruction. Maybe it's the tongue, it's the upper airway muscles that are loose. What that creates is almost like a stress response, and it kind of wakes you up out of whatever deep stage you're in. And so when we have the repeated cycles of that overnight, you can imagine the sleep fragmentation piece. The other piece is the fact that now you have an obstruction, your oxygen levels are going to dip. And so that causes a lot of strain on the heart, increased heart pumping, heart muscle function. And over time, we start to see those downstream effects. And overall, all this does is it increases cortisol, increased stress response, and then we start to see all the downstream effects, insulin resistance, hypertension, heart attacks, arrhythmias, and things like that. Now, the typical things we think about when it comes to risk factors are, again, the position. One of the things we think about is the position of the tongue in relation to the mouth, right? So if your tongue is falling back to your throat, it might end up being a cause of obstruction. But then the upper airway muscles kind of get lax during sleep, especially when we get into that rapid eye movement sleep, which is also known as dream sleep, where your muscles are paralyzed. You're more likely to have collapse of the upper airway. Now, on top of that, if there's excess fat, which is where the concept of obesity and things like that comes in, that's only going to make that airway even narrower. In women, with hormonal changes, there's some fluid shifts which puts them at risk. And then there are also facial structures, depending on your jaw position and how far back it is and how it's probably contributing to that crowding of the upper airway, that can contribute to sleep apnea. In terms of symptoms, right, for most men, we would see the classic symptoms of super loud snoring, gasping, pauses, scary looking stuff, daytime sleepiness. For women, what we've seen is, it's interesting. You probably will hear some snoring, but it may not necessarily be as dramatic. But you may see more things like insomnia. They may present with insomnia. They may present with headaches, overall fatigue, depression, anxiety, thyroid hormone issues, right? That's the first thing everybody says when you go to your doctor and say, I'm having all these symptoms. They'll just say, well, it's your hormones. And so what does that even mean? Okay, so it's my hormones, but what do we do about that, right? So I think that's really something that it's important for women to understand. And so many times we get that it causes a delay in diagnosing sleep apnea in women. Yeah. Did you want to
To
ask?
that point,
Yeah.
you are having hormonal changes.
Yeah.
And those hormonal changes are messing with your sleep, whether it be hot flashes or just the insomnia.
Yeah.
And so how do you make sense of it without going overboard?
Yeah.
But then the other question is that I had from my doctor, and I said, well, if it's a hormonal change that is making a change in my tissues, would taking hormones reverse it? What would you say?
So I would even take us back and walk through this, right? Most times, if you're fortunate enough to share a room with a partner that says, "Oh, we can't share the same bed," then of course that makes it easy. You're snoring, you want to go get checked. But if, as a woman, you're having symptoms of poor sleep, I think it's important to take a step back and say, what does that even mean? Am I having a hard time falling asleep? In which case, you might just have insomnia, especially what we call sleep onset insomnia, right? And that can come from so many reasons. That can come from, like you said, hot flashes, night sweats. It could come from your mind racing. It could come from sleep hygiene issues, right? So you want to almost be like a detective. Where is the issue? Or am I waking up multiple times at night when my mouth feels dry and I feel like I'm gasping or something? Then in that case, that may clue you in to say, okay, maybe there's something wrong with sleep maintenance here. I think if you're unfortunate enough, which most women have, is a combination of both insomnia and sleep apnea, which is why by that time you need to see a sleep specialist to help you decipher what's going on. So I think that is really important. Now, when it comes to the hormonal changes, right, around perimenopause, menopause, one of the things we start to see is a decline in estrogen. And one of the things we know is that that actually helps. Estrogen, in addition to, all the many functions, help with temperature regulation and things. So decline is going to probably contribute to the hot flashes and night sweats. And if you already have a busy mind, that's a busy brain, and then now you're waking up in a pool of sweat, then your mind starts to race, right? So there's specific things that hormone replacement will help for. That's one of those hot flashes, those sort of vasomotor symptoms. When it comes to sleep apnea specifically, because the phenotype or the way it works in women is a combination of issues, I'm not sure that we've seen research showing that, HRT will fix suddenly
Hormone replacement
strengthen.
therapy.
Exactly. I'm sorry, hormone replacement therapy. So I would still go through the normal route, but I think it feels messy the outcome is, as a woman, you're exhausted all the time, you're tired, you feel a little depressed, you're waking up. I think it's key to kind of say, where is the issue? If you're around that stage, especially if you've done all the basic stuff and you're still struggling, you're never wrong to ask for a home sleep test. It is easily accessible, relatively affordable. You can hopefully get it in soon so you can have a diagnosis and start working towards treatment.
I just wanted to say I live at intersection, so I wanted to ensure that we talk about the fact that sleep disorders like sleep apnea are often underdiagnosed in women, especially Black women. And
You read my
research
mind.
shows that Black individuals are 40, 43 and a half, or somewhere around there, around 43% more likely to suffer from sleep disorders, but are less likely to receive proper diagnosis and treatment, right? And so as we look at some of these challenges, we always need to ensure that we're raising awareness, not just with those of us who can wear our Apple Watches and all of this, but we're really addressing this systemically.
Exactly. And then, that leads also to a question about the accuracy of these tests in people of color, because the pulse oximeter, for example, has been shown, unless they've changed it, that it is not as accurate in people with increased melanin, actually in general, than white individuals, which begs the question, what about anything else in terms of diagnostics?
So for now, I think the goal relatively for for diagnosing sleep apnea, I think it's been fairly accurate.
Okay.
There are other things that we would consider depending on where the pulse ox is situated, right? Is it over a painted nail or something of that sort where you may need to take that off because of the color? But most times it seems to be relatively reliable. There is a unique group of patients, which are sickle cell patients, where we've really struggled with that just because of the way the oxygen carrying capacity is. And there have been studies that say, okay, maybe we should use a different device. It's called co-oximetry, where you're looking at this different spectrum of oxygenation and things like that. It gets very technical. It gets very complicated. And so for now, these are the tools we have. And I think also just looking at trends over time, we can see that there's consistency in the results that we get.
Barbara, do you want to talk a little bit about any differences you see when, for example, using CPAP or getting folks to, what's the word? Cooperate, if you will, with their treatment plan or feel supported?
Yeah, I think the data shows that adherence to CPAP, I won't be as transparent here on my personal journey, but it hasn't been an easy ride for me, right? And so, I want to show up and be authentic in that it's not the type of solution that you just you try and then you're consistently utilizing it and it's comfortable. Now look, at the end of the day, we do have data that shows that it is still the gold standard. It makes a significant difference in terms of your sleep health. um what we do see though, and I know the folks at ResMed would have significant data to show that when there is a digital platform that supports people, so you can actually see how many hours you were on CPAP, you get data, and there's this feedback loop, then we see a significant spike in terms of adherence, right? Women tend to thrive in community anyway, and so that would be my recommendation: is that as women we find opportunities to leverage the data that's provided through the machine, through the device, but then also find communities to really help us as we navigate this journey with our CPAP devices.
So I know that we have limited time and I want to get to just a couple of more things. Funke, talk a little bit about, are there any other sleep disorders that women should know about and be aware of?
So in addition to sleep apnea,
Apnea.
another big one is insomnia, and this is quite common in women as well.
I'm going to just stop you there because it's really interesting, and I've heard this before, that it's a sleep disorder, but I think most of us think of insomnia like it's a characteristic as opposed to a disorder.
So there's I think the difference would be the fact that you might have transient insomnia. You have stress in your life, you're aggravated, your teenager is keeping you up, and then that period gets better, and then you're sleeping. But when I'm talking about insomnia, I'm talking about chronic insomnia, where you've had difficulties falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up at a time that's earlier than desired, and it's causing daytime effects. And this typically we say should have been going on for about 3 months. You don't have to suffer for 3 months. If it's stressing you out, you got to seek out help. But yeah, that's the main difference. There's the short-term insomnia, and then there's more of the chronic insomnia, which is an actual diagnosis. And really, two mainstays of therapy. I mean, the gold standard is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, where you go through 6 or 8 sessions where you're working with a sleep expert on this, usually a behavioral sleep expert. And then sometimes sleep medications may be needed, especially if you're in that stage where you need some kind of to bridge the gap. But I think it's really working on an exit strategy when it comes to sleep medications. And then there's restless leg syndrome or periodic limb movement disorders. And these are just those discomforts we have usually our lower legs, can also involve our upper arms. We see it a lot in women who in pregnancy, but we can also see it in certain conditions, women with renal disease, with anemia and things like that. And then there's also narcolepsy. And this is, again, really often underdiagnosed. It's mimicked as depression, as ADD, as thyroid issues for a long time before people finally get diagnosed. And that's that irresistible urge you have to sleep despite getting relatively sufficient amount of sleep. And usually it's associated with other symptoms like hallucinations, sleep paralysis. It's really profound sleepiness that's way out of the norm. So I would say those are the main things you definitely want to be aware of. There's also medical disorders that might contribute to sleep issues like thyroid, hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. Low thyroid, high thyroid can also affect your sleep. So I would say those are the most common ones that I often encounter.
I know that depression can sometimes present with either early awakening or perhaps even more, feeling more tired or being more sleepy. Are there any other conditions where someone, I guess the narcolepsy is one where you oversleep. Is there are those the most common?
Depression, thyroid. Yeah, I mean, I think actually in some situations with diabetes, especially when not well controlled, you might also have that fatigue. And even apart from narcolepsy, there's a disorder we call idiopathic hypersomnia, meaning you're sleepy and we have no clue why. That's also one diagnosis that you might see.
So as we wrap up, Barbara, this one's for you. And that is, we started out early on talking about disparities and just our cultural challenges in awareness and also appreciation for the need for sleep. What kinds of initiatives or changes would you like to see?
Yes. So I think to create a healthier society, we must instill the cultural mindset that views rest as a core value, right? I'm Jamaican by birth, and I can tell you culturally, resting is equivalent to being lazy, right? How do we shift cultural mindset to actually honor rest as a core value? I think that's important. We do that by advocacy. Each of us can become an advocate for sleep health in our personal lives and in our professional lives. If we're managers, if you're a provider, a physician, a parent, or any other role, how do we, Funke talked earlier about setting boundaries as parents. How do we promote good sleep practices within our realm of influence so that we can make a significant difference? And then if you're managing teams, how do you support flexible work hours? How do you discourage a culture of overwork. Those are the things we need folks to start thinking about, right? And not having people on call saying, "Oh, I was up at 2 a.m." or sending emails at midnight, and seeing that as okay, you're committed. But when we shift the culture to ensure that we really respect the fact that there's a need to rest, when physicians can emphasize the importance of sleep in patient care, when we provide resources that really improve sleep health, I think at the end of the day, we all have a role to play. And I think the clarion call for me is that we play our part and we become advocates for sleep health in our personal and our professional lives.
Beautifully said. Funke, just talk to us a little bit about what kinds of suggestions you'd leave us with as women in terms of, in addition to all the great information that you gave us, just maybe some last thoughts about what we can do to better take care of ourselves from a sleep standpoint.
So I share this acronym. It's called REST, REST, APT, right? So really, R stands for respecting your boundaries, like Barbara just talked about so elegantly. And then stands for expectations, like setting the expectations. Ditch the superwoman cape. Like, stop being a superhero. Like, you are not the savior. And we have to come to realize that. Ditch that badge of honor. And then S stands for really making sleep a priority. And what does that look like? I use an acronym within an acronym as if I'm not complex enough. So I use the acronym CREATE, so consistent bedtime and wake up time as much as possible, consistent sleep schedules. R stands for having a routine that really just fills your cup, right? Whether it's a calming ritual that you take a bath, you read a book, that really sets you in the tone for bed. Listen to a nice podcast. E stands for the environment. So keep a very cool environment, especially when you have the hot flashes and all that discomfort. Really keeping the bedroom as cool as possible and using breathable fabric is very important. And making sure your room is black, it's pitch black as much as possible. And A stands for assign the bed for sleep and sleep only in bed, right? Because we are checking our phones, we're eating, we're watching movies, we're arguing with our spouse, we're worried, we're doing all kinds of things in bed, which is not ideal. So you really want to limit non-sleep activities to the bed. T stands for technology, which we already talked about. So have a technology plan, like beyond what time am I going to stop using devices and watching TV. And then E is really looking into what do you want to eliminate. So caffeine, alcohol, heavy meals, all those things are going to interrupt your sleep. So you want to limit it to use close to bedtime. So that's create for prioritizing sleep. And then the final T in rest is really take stock and Thanksgiving. Like, reflect on your journey. It's not meant to be perfect, right? Celebrate the wins. Look for where you need to make adjustments. Reassess, be true to yourself. Where do I need to set more boundaries? Where do I need to give myself more grace? And be thankful. So that's it.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, before we sign off, I just want to make sure that there wasn't something that I didn't ask that you thought was really important for our audience to know. And I'll ask Barbara that first.
No, I think we touched on it all. Phenomenal.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
Funke,
Yeah.
how about
Thanks
yourself?
so much. Thanks so much for having us. This has been very, very good.
It has been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Funke Afolabi-Brown and Dr. Barbara Roden, for being with us today and for all the great information you've provided.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in today, and thanks to our exceptional guests, Dr. Barbara Roden and Dr. Funke Afolabi-Brown. We've covered a lot of ground today, including understanding the cultural barriers to good sleep, recognizing sleep disorders in women and children, and learning practical tips for better sleep hygiene. Remember, as Dr. Afolabi-Brown emphasized, sleep is not a luxury, it's a necessity and a powerful tool for overall health and well-being. I also want to underline Dr. Roden's call to become advocates for sleep health in our personal and professional lives. Whether it's setting better boundaries, creating a sleep-friendly environment, or simply giving ourselves permission to rest, small changes can lead to big improvements on our sleep quality and overall health. As we wrap up, I encourage you to reflect on your own sleep habits. What changes can you make tonight to prioritize your rest? Remember, a good night's sleep is one of the best gifts you can give yourself and your loved ones. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with friends and family who might benefit from this information. And don't forget to subscribe to Beyond the Paper Gown on your favorite podcast platform and rate us. It really does help. And for more information on future podcasts, articles, and events, I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter at beyondthepapergown.com. Until next time, take good care and sweet dreams. Our episode was produced by Patrick Shambayati and myself, and our associate producer is Kyla McMillian.